I just feel like maybe we're coming to a point where the cost of doing what you love shouldn't be at the cost of maintaining your craft. I know pretty much anyone who is clicking on this video knows kind of what happened with Floriansen and Nightwish and canceling some dates due to quite a few reasons, which I am going to go over. But I actually thought it kind of brings about conversation of a lot of things happening in the music industry right now. For those of you who either aren't listeners of City of Sound or subscribers to this channel, and you're wondering, why is this guy even talking about this? Who is he? Just a little bit about me. I'm the lead singer of the band City of Sound. We are a 100% DIY, fan-dependent, cinematic rock band. And we've been going for about the last 5-6 years, putting ourselves on tour, gaining a lot of new listeners, and just working our ass off to try to break through into that next level of following. So we have done the exhaustion. We have done the stress. We have been in the darkest places of wondering if anything that you're doing is worth anything. Do not feel bad for us. We chose this road. Nobody forced us to be DIY and fan dependent and resisting signing to a label. So I just want to make that very, very clear. And I just felt like I had something to say about this. That could totally just be me having frontman syndrome, which totally exists. But I also felt like it brought up some issues. Maybe it's time for the rock world to change. And in a music industry that has evolved and changed every other week, it is ironic that the touring side of the industry has still remained the same, except just a lot more expensive. So instead of starting with the Nightwish dates being canceled, I figured let's kind of talk about what's happening right now in terms of bands pulling in money on tours, the exhaustion that is happening, running these dates back to back, what it does to those trying to maintain their craft, and also just how incredible it was, honestly, that Floor was even able to pull off as many dates as she did, given all the circumstances. So something that just has kind of been on my mind, kind of bringing up not even just the mental health aspect of the stress that can happen on tour, of the nonstop hitting 100 dates straight. For anyone who hasn't really been kind of seeing what's been going on in the music industry, more and more big bands are canceling tours. Even here right now, we have Shinedown, who had canceled their mainland Europe tour due to economic and logistical issues. You have concert tickets, which are skyrocketing by the use of ticket vendors who are also coinciding with promoters. Then you also have management and agencies cutting off their earnings from the top, and then the band taking their percentage from the net, not the gross profit. Now, a lot of people are wondering what's been happening to these concert tickets, why they've been skyrocketing. And one of the reasons that they've been skyrocketing is this use of dynamic pricing, which is what many of these ticket vendors are using in order to pretty much monetize as much as possible on a tour. Let's just be honest. Now, that does help major artists pull in a lot more money. For some artists, though, who maybe are more on the fringe or still kind of making their way, sometimes you end up actually not taking as much home because of the increase in production cost. And whether it's buses or vans or crew, there's a lot of skyrocketing happening in terms of payout that happens in order to put a tour on, or even just a leg of a tour on. Now, we do live in a world where I think every musician should have some form of a pseudo MBA at this point. I think if you are in deals with a label or with a management or an agency, and you kind of got in terms of your contract of what you're giving up. And I think nowadays there are so many channels that are dedicated to helping musicians and artists make sure that they are safe and taken care of, that I genuinely don't think it's much of an excuse anymore if you're taken advantage of. That's just my honest take. Now, I am going to shout out one creator, Tank the Tech, who has a great video on this of how much more money are managers making than bands, because I'm not going to be diving a whole lot into the subject because I do want to talk about what's happened with Nightwish. But if you're interested in that, I will put a link to it in the description below. But what we are finding is more and more bands are canceling dates, canceling tours due to logistics, due to the economics of the run of tour. And we're finding this place where this old world of touring, which is once you get on the road, you stay on the road and you don't get off until those wheels fall off and everyone's exhausted. And this is where I think as a young band, a young singer, I think this is where we can actually look to those who have come before us, also came through kind of those heydays of rock and roll and partying after shows and being on the road nonstop. And I think even now we can start learning lessons of why that lifestyle isn't viable anymore. And honestly, it doesn't serve the art itself either. Now, I promise I'm going to bring this all full circle to the Nightwish situation and canceling tour dates. But I think once you add all these things up, we are in a music industry that is ever evolving in terms of song distribution, AI now coming into the scene. Even us, we are moving into the Web3 world because we're working with a platform called Gala that we just signed a partnership with, which makes us fan dependent. And it is a way for us to move the music industry forward and create new ventures for these DIY bands who are generating their own base. But the interesting thing is that though the music industry is ever evolving and changing, the idea of constantly being on the road is not. So we're in a place where there's two sides of this coin. And nowadays where content is so important and fan engagement, you have a lot of artists who are being ran into the ground. I think what we're finding more and more is that things are changing. And I think that is where the Nightwish situation brings up a great conversation that music artists and their listeners can start having a really good dialogue of what the listeners actually want out of the music artists they listen to, and the music artist kind of setting expectations on the healthiest way to get in front of their listeners, but making sure that they can give them 1,000% at their show. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Flora Jansen announced that she had to cancel some shows on the Nightwish tour. My health is not good enough to responsibly perform. Now, for those who also don't know, she also recently battled a stint with cancer and is also pregnant. In my opinion, it was incredible that she was on the road in general. Now, Floor comes from a place where her voice really matters. And I understand some people watching this might be like, what does that even mean? Floor's vocals and the performance that she has to bring at a show is highly demanding, which means her warm-up is very long, which means she has to be in constant practice, even on the road, to keep herself healthy, to maintain her voice in order to perform with the energy that she needs to perform with to hit a very wide range of notes, very detailed intonation and tone. Just to be honest, not that many artists do have to do that. There are artists who literally don't even need to warm up. They can just go up and they can just like knock songs out, and it is what it is. But for someone like Floor, I think there's a lot of understanding that people need to have with even all the other parameters aside. Even if she came out and announced this with none of those things happening, I think it would still need to be understood. And a big reason is because I consider Floor a master of her craft. In order for her to take care of that craft, to give Nightwish fans the show that she knows they deserve, that craft has to be cared for. In order for that craft to be cared for means rest, which means eating healthy and being in places where you're capable of eating healthy and taking care of yourself and staying hydrated. I don't think a lot of people may take in how important being hydrated is to putting on a good vocal performance. And once you're on a certain amount of days on the road, back to back, even just a little anecdote, her collapsing at a show from being ill is very scary and is a huge sign of dehydration. Prior to our DreamHack concert, I had sprained my MCL and had a slight tear in my meniscus. I had to brace up and go do the show. When the adrenaline wore off, I went to the back and I fell to my knees. It was like my legs just gave out on me. And I did think to myself, thank God we don't have a show tomorrow. Because I was like, I don't know if I could do a show tomorrow, you know, but it's always in your head. That little thing is like always in your head, even on tour. This is what you're working so hard for. But I think a lot of people think you're bringing in millions of dollars and you're making the success. The vast majority of bands who are going on tour, like us, we're funding our own tour and we almost never make that money back. The added stress of trying to recoup your cost, but also maintaining a certain level of performance. Even that alone, before getting ill or before staying up too late or before having to hit the road, you're kind of already on this place where you're starting to feel really stressed out and pressured. Now, that is not even comparable to like what she's going through. It's a really good place, I think, to have a conversation of maybe it's time to change how touring's done. this is going to be a little bit of a hot take, because I will say all the cancellation of all these tours that's been happening, it affects crews. It affects so many people, even outside the artist, which really sucks. And it's going to start creating a change in the industry. I don't know what that looks like. But for some of these more demanding performances out of certain artists and singers and players, I do think there is a conversation to be had on how often touring needs to happen, how you break legs down in order for there to be rest. And just, people always wonder, after a band's been big for 5 years, people start being like, the lead singer's not nearly as good as they used to be. There's a reason for that, because their vocal is fried. And when you're trying to hit 100 dates on the road nonstop, and then, for some bands, like sometimes they're pressured to party at night and like keep contacts and meet certain people, then you're staying up late and then you have to perform the next day, which is terrible for your voice. And then, 5 years later, your voice is gone and you're exhausted. And then a lot of times depression kicks in. And then that leads to all other kinds of things. And then we sit back and we wonder, like, what happened? I think that if people were encouraged to take care of themselves, A, while they're on the road, and B, to take the breaks necessary to keep their craft at a certain level for their listeners. So that way, every time their listeners show up to a show, they know that they're going to get the top quality of what they hear on that band's album. I think we would find ourselves in a lot healthier place. And I'm kind of just like word vomiting on this video, but a lot of it is because I think there's just a conversation to be had. I think that the industry has told artists and bands that you got to be on the road, agents, you got to be on the road, booking agents, you got to be on the road, because they're taking a percentage of it. They're getting a piece of it. So of course they want you on the road as much as possible. But I think if we removed that aspect and we created a dialogue like this, and if artists could just talk to their fan bases of like, we're going to do this certain amount of dates because afterwards, like, guys, we have to rest. Like, we have to be healthy. We need to work out. We need to stay hydrated. We need to eat healthy. I need to take care of my voice. I actually think that if that dialogue was happening, I think we would see a really healthy change in the industry in terms of the touring side of things. And I think you would find a lot of bands with a lot more longevity, not just in terms of being able to play shows, but how they can play shows. And I think it's worth having. I totally understand if anyone disagrees. And if you do, like, put it in the comments below. That's all right. Like, you totally disagree with me. I'm coming from the perspective of just like what I've personally have experienced and kind of how this situation hit me. Because this right here, I think, was the absolute banger right here. I had hoped that I would be able to rebuild enough energy to still perform those wonderful solo shows in the Netherlands. But unfortunately, that's not the case. To ensure the health of both myself and my unborn baby, I need to rest and focus entirely on my recovery in the final phase of my pregnancy. And one thing I will say that I think is really beautiful, the only thing I saw from Nightwish fans was support. I didn't see anything negative at all. I think that kind of reinforces my point that if we remove kind of this expectation that's coming from the top down and we allow the engagement of this personal one-on-one dialogue, I think you're going to find a lot of artists being a lot more healthy and taking care of themselves. And in return, engaging even more with their listener base because it creates this personal connection. Then you have a listener base that wants to see the artist take care of themselves. And then that in return makes the artist want to create the best songs and the best orchestration and even take care of themselves more because they see the care that their base gives to them. The industry's in a really interesting place right now. And it just makes me think that maybe it is time to move on from this archaic rock and roll until the wheels fall off kind of culture. And maybe it's time to start moving towards encouraging artists to maintain their craft, take care of themselves, to book their shows accordingly of what actually is possible for them to perform at their peak and then taking a break. I think that if that conversation starts happening, you're going to find even more intense and passionate performances because artists are going to be healthy and in such a place that they can give 1,000% at every performance to the people that gave their dream life.